That's what you have to look forward to. A society that does not allow its most talented people to work on its most serious problems. A society that has been commercialized, corporatized, merchandised, trivialized into a caricature of itself. And if you open up the panorama of reality, you will see that never in the history of the world has a society piled up more wealth, not necessarily empirical wealth. Look at our public works and how they're crumbling. A society has piled up more wealth than any society in history, and has not transferred and distributed that wealth for the well-being of the majority of its people. And this income disparity and this wealth disparity is getting worse and worse. Where 1% of the richest people in this country have wealth equivalent to the bottom 95%. And so I'm giving you these broader statistical representations of reality without necessarily going into case studies, which could be really heart-rending, because I just want you to ask yourself, are you getting angry? What's your level of social indignation? What happens when you do get angry? Do you have an outlet? Now let's focus on the political system here. How do corporations take over government? That's an interesting excursus. Be a nice course at the Woodrow Wilson School. How do they take over government? Now, you might say, why do they want to take over government? Well, go back to Thomas Jefferson, who said the purpose of representative government is to, quote, counteract the excesses of moneyed interest, end quote. That was our major bulwark against a rampaging wreckage and havoc of greed and commercial instinct. By the way, every major religion in the world, many centuries ago, told their adherents not to give too much power to the merchant class, because that commercial instinct is so motivated, so relentless, so single-minded, that when it comes up against civic values, it runs roughshod over, or co-opts, or weakens it, or destroys it. Civic values can be democracy values, could be freedom of speech, petition, assembly. It could be health and safety, respect for posterity, respect for the environment. All the things that we would like to say are not for sale. Every democracy's got to have sanctuaries where what is going on in those sanctuaries are never for sale. Government should never be for sale. Elections should never be for sale. Children should never be for sale, commercialized as they are today, with junk food and junk drink and violent programming, while their parents are commuting further and further back and forth, desperately trying to get out of debt or meet their bills. Now, here's the way the power works. And it's nothing particularly new to you, but it has to be kept in the forefront. The first way corporations take over government is to buy elections. Is to basically dangle a lot of money in front of a lot of candidates who want to go on TV, who want to get reach to the voters, and they can make plausible commentary for all this money that they deal out. They can say that they want access to the members of Congress, say, or the state legislature. They can say that they need less regulation. They need tax relief. They need more consideration for the jobs that they want to create, etc. It's a real laurel lie. It's very tempting for political officials to listen to these plausible rationalizations. But in their cumulative impact, what happens is money begins to nullify votes. It nullifies the consequences of what voters thought that they were voting for. The two parties then hand them something that they could never have thought of, these corporations. The two parties develop a duopoly. And as a result, what happens is that they carve up the districts, gerrymander the districts. And in carving up the districts, 90% of the House of Representative districts are not competitive in a two-party frame. That is, the Democrats run these districts, the Republicans run of these districts. So there is no election when there's no contest. And there's no contest when you don't have two viable choices, at least, on the ballot. And as a result, you have coronations. Now what's fascinating about this is a preclusive destruction of electoral democracy. It's one thing not having multi-party candidates the way they have in Canada and Western Europe and South America and elsewhere. But not to have a two-party election in most congressional districts, I might add, in most state legislative districts. 60% of the incumbents in the state legislature in Massachusetts don't even have an opponent. It's a coronation. Now what's fascinating about this is the lack of reaction, the lack of movement to correct this, the lack of indignation at being stripped of any kind of choice of your candidates as voters, the lack of sufficient self-respect by articulate voters to go to the core of what happens when you don't have a competitive democracy, which is that you have an oligarchy, you have a plutocracy, you have an autocracy, you have the necessities of the people not addressed. And there are very serious daily consequences, which I alluded to statistically, because of that situation. Now, to top it off, the duopoly carving up districts to monopolize one or the other, depending on who runs the state government and can redistrict. They develop state-based laws that are extremely obstructive to third-party challengers and independent candidates. Now, if you're just going to get a few votes, they won't bother with you. But if they think you're going to get more than a few votes, and if one party thinks you're going to get more votes from that party than the other major party, that's when the cat's claws come out from these state statutes. And so you have states in this country where it will cost millions of dollars for a presidential candidate just to get on. You have states like Texas, which prohibits anyone who voted in last Tuesday's primary in Texas from signing a petition on the streets to put anybody on the presidential ballot. So you're petitioning in Houston or Galveston, and the first question you got to ask is, did you vote in the primary? And if the person said yes, say, I'm sorry, you can't sign this petition. That's just an example. In Ohio, if you are a petitioner and you're not a resident of Ohio, you cannot collect signatures for a federal office. That is now being challenged. In Pennsylvania, an illegal rendition of the Pennsylvania statutes has the following. If you as a voter signs the petition and you have changed your address that you put down on the petition from when you registered to vote, the court struck thousands of our signatures. If you are a voter and you're not registered and you sign our petition, the court struck unlawfully our signatures, thousands of them. End up, we're off the ballot in 2004. And the voters in Pennsylvania were denied their choice of candidate. There are literally hundreds of these obstructions in state after state, sometimes down to the county level. We lost about 1,000 signatures in Ohio because the woman who got 1,000 signatures out of Toledo, who is in her early 50s, signed her signature. And the state official, with malice aforethought, struck all of those hundreds of signatures on the basis that her signature in 2004 didn't match her signature when she was 21 and she registered to vote.